Hello everyone and welcome to session 19 of the Business School Leaders Forum, brought to you by GoTo Webinar by LogMeIn. Today I'm joined by Aisling McMahon, Talent Development Manager at GoTo by LogMeIn, and Joseph Walsh, Global Product Specialist, GoTo Webinar by LogMeIn. Aisling and Joseph will be presenting on tips and tricks for running successful training sessions on digital platforms. In a moment, I'm going to pass over to Aisling, but before we do, just to let everyone know that this session will be interactive. There will be some polls which will pop up on your screens. And if you've got any questions throughout the presentations, please feel free to put them into the question tab, and hopefully we get enough time to answer all of them at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Aisling.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for having myself and Joe along today. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are dialing into us from today. So as Paul was saying, I am a talent development manager with LogMeIn. So my role is primarily developing and delivering different training modules to our global employees across all of our locations. As you can imagine, with our current circumstances that we are in, not being able to travel, our classroom has become more virtual, obviously, and more global with that too. So it was great to kind of come along, and even for myself, just to kind of reflect on, I suppose, our journey as a team over the past couple of months, and to be able to share some of those insights with you today in terms of how we have adapted, and hopefully be able to share some things that will help you as well in your own roles. So in terms of the title for our session today, it's development in the new normal. I think that's a really important point to be comfortable with at this time. Things have changed and they're not going to go back to normal, and it's really important for us to adapt. The things that I will miss, I mean, I would have been on a plane an awful lot of last year. I think I actually spent 1/3 of the year last year, almost 4 months out of the country. I probably should tell my tax man, visiting different locations and delivering training across all of those locations. So I do miss that face-to-face content and being in the physical classroom. But in terms of some of the positives, do I miss living out of a suitcase? Hell no. I do enjoy being able to spend time with my family and friends. So I think it's about looking at the positives and also what we can learn from this experience as well. So of course, I want to get back to actually running in-person training, but now I think more than ever, it's really important to think about our hybrid approach to learning. And that's something that we as a team within LogMeIn in the talent space had always been looking to move towards, but I think with the current circumstances, that has been accelerated even more to look at that hybrid approach. So, pre-COVID, we were running a lot of our workshops virtually to an extent, but primarily we were in the classroom for a lot of the learning that we were doing. And I think, as I was saying to you earlier, I do miss that face-to-face, being in the classroom, having that energy, but I find, the virtual classroom now, there is that energy is there as well. And I think what's amazing as well is how global my classroom has become. Even at the beginning of this week, I was running a session and I had attendees from Sao Paulo, Guatemala, Boston, Germany, Bangalore. So fantastic to be able to do that, and really looking to embrace that as we move forward. So before I kind of move into the content, I'd love to kind of take a pulse check, and just going to do a poll to actually look at that now, because I'd love to kind of hear and understand from you in terms of what worries you most about running training in the new normal. And some of the answers or some of the ideas that I put here are all things that I would have considered and thought about in relation to facilitating in this new normal. But would love to hear, I suppose, from you and your response to this poll, so that I can look to delve in a bit more, kind of highlight some of those points as we move through the content today. Just love to hear in terms of what is worrying you most. Is it one or two, or is it all of the above?
Okay, Aisling, so we've got the poll has been launched. We'll give it a few more seconds for everyone to answer.
Excellent. Yeah, so try and get everyone to get their opinion in there, just so we can hear from you, because I will look to touch on all of these over the course of today, but it'd be interesting to understand if there's maybe one in particular that is of the most concern for people in regards to the virtual workshops.
Okay, so I've just closed the poll, and we have 16% say holding the audience attention, 0% say delivery of the content, 39% say engagement of the audience through conversation, and 45% say all of the above.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. Yeah, and I think that was the one that I was thinking would probably be the one that was of most concern, was everything that we have discussed here. Interesting how 0% said delivery of the content, but I'm sure that it's probably within that all of the above. So brilliant. That's great context for me as I move through the content this afternoon. So excellent. We'll have to touch on that more. Okay, so this is the 70-20-10 model of learning, and I'm very confident and sure that for many of you that are working in the learning space or in the educational space, this model isn't something that is brand new information to you. It talks about how we learn, and it talks about that 70% of the learning that we do is actually on the job learning. So, when we are in college or we're in the school environment, the majority of the learning that we do is in the classroom. But it's interesting how when we actually move into the office environment, that what actually happens is that, what actually happens when we move into the office environment is that majority of learning that we actually do is on the job learning. So it's, working with different stakeholders, working across different projects. That is actually where a lot of that learning comes from. 20% of learning then is actually learning through others. So through our managers, through feedback, through one-on-ones, coaching, networking, etc. And then 10% then is actually that classroom-based learning. So learning through that kind of more formal structured training, those courses and programs. So in designing our courses, we really like to think about it in relation to this model. So what are the key things that we want our attendees to actually take away from the classroom environment? Number two, how can they actually do their learning through others? What are the things they can actually learn from their peers, aside from me as the facilitator actually delivering the program? Because I often find it is that in that peer learning that you actually get so much from the training itself, that my colleagues are also experiencing a similar thing and look at how they've actually dealt with that. And then finally then, how can we actually ensure the learning that we do can be practically applied on the job? So again, that was something we always thought about in the classroom environment, but it's about how do we actually condense that? How do we make that even more bite-sized for how we actually look at remote learning and remote training as well? So something I'm going to build on further as we look at our approach to learning in this world. So before I kind of move more into that, I wanted to kind of talk about, I suppose, some instructional design practices that we had to understand ourselves as a team in relation to our new audience and how they wanted to receive learning. So I think, I say it's a new-ish approach. I think it's we were always conscious of the learner first and how they want to learn and what they want to be learning about. But there were some things that we had to kind of reflect on before kind of jumping into how we were going to approach and tailor how we were going to deliver the learning itself. So that first one there, I think, was really about our own understanding and acceptance of the situation itself. I for one, and I'm sure anyone here on the call can definitely say that the past 6 months have been a roller coaster of emotion and experience and everything that in between that. And I think at the beginning of this year, we as a team had a roadmap in place in terms of the content we wanted to deliver and the locations we would be visiting, etc. And it was like we had all the answers and then they changed all the questions. So we had to go back to the drawing board. We had to go back to the beginning and really think about what do our learners need and what is the best way for us to actually provide them with that. So it wasn't a case of thinking, okay, this was our roadmap, let's shoehorn that roadmap into the current circumstances, because that was never going to work. So it was a case of actually looking at, a learning needs analysis in terms of what do our learners actually need right now. And I think what's important as well, in times like this, I feel people think that learning might take a back seat. Whereas what we are finding and what we found as well is that it needs even more of a spotlight. There are managers that are now thrown into a position whereby they used to sit with their teams, and now their teams may only be a couple of miles down the road from them, but they are now all thrust into that position of being a remote manager. And being a remote manager when you haven't even had the time to process it yourself, to even accept the change or even help your team prepare for that change either. So, a learning spotlight really important in regards to this time. Second there, I think for us was really kind of re-looking at our content. So really ensuring that we were getting that right. What do people need right now? And the biggest thing, as you can imagine, was understanding how to actually manage in this remote environment. So really understanding what they actually needed and aligning our training to that. Now, we do already, to an extent, align our training to the different timelines in the year. For example, we're heading into our mid-year reviews, we're rolling out training in regards to delivering feedback, performance management, etc. But even more so now, really tailoring to what was required, and that was very much about actually managing in this remote world. And again, short and bite-sized, and I'll talk more about that in a couple of moments, but, actually having our content, between 90 minutes to 2 hours and no more than that, because that's definitely the amount of time you can actually hold someone's attention, and also conscious of all the different things that people are trying to manage at the moment in terms of their own home environment. So that was something that we were also very conscious of as well. So again, I suppose in terms of content, very much moving away from that full classroom day. And I think, to an extent, we were trying to move away from that. There's so much that is covered in a full 8-hour session, how much that is actually retained. So looking to kind of really blend that hybrid of virtual and also that classroom learning was always our plan. But I think, with our current circumstances, that was, again, accelerated even more. In terms of learning styles, I think, everyone here, I'm sure on the call is in the learning business. So we all know that people learn differently and have different ways they like to learn and interact and engage. And that, again, for us was an important thing to think about, but particularly in terms of thinking about preferences in terms of, introversion and extroversion and how that would actually translate in that virtual remote environment as well. And again, I think for us as well, it was about, in order to tailor to that, not having one approach to learning. So for us, we've designed a number of different ways to support learning in this current time. So we've looked at running or having there available online self-paced learning. So learning that you can actually just log on yourself and go through and reflect and think about. Obviously having our virtual classroom-based learning as well, and that is something that I'll be talking a bit more about in a couple of moments. Also looking at the flipped classroom as well. So thinking about that in relation to people actually completing their own self-paced learning, having time to reflect, think about what they want to discuss further, and then running like 40 to 45-minute sessions where we just actually discuss the content and have conversations virtually around that. And then also at the moment, we're actually dipping our toe into the world of podcasts. So looking at different kind of themes that are really relevant to our employees and looking to deliver them based on conversations that we would have with some of our senior execs or our managers that are experiencing different situations, and actually making them available to all employees. So again, it's not a one size fits all in this. Of course, we were running our virtual sessions and we're using our great GoTo products to do that, but there's also different ways people learn as well, whether it's self-paced, whether they need time to reflect and be thoughtful and then come together to actually discuss. So looking to adapt our approach to all those different methods. And I think, the role of L&D in any organization has always been necessary to change and adapt. And we always hear the saying that, change is the only constant. I think L&D has constantly needed to adapt with that as well. But I think, at this time, it's also needed to align as well in terms of what's actually feasible for people. And I think, for us, for example, in relation to our podcast, we're conscious that, in this new remote environment where parents are looking to try and homeschool and do their work and learn and everything in between, that they might not always have the time to sit, with me in the virtual classroom for 90 minutes to 2 hours, but they might have time to listen to a podcast when they're taking the dog for a walk or just trying to escape the madness of the home environment for a little bit. So looking to tailor our learning to what actually works for people right now. And finally there then, fit for virtual purpose. So I kind of want to use this as a segue into our next topic around making our virtual classroom fit for purpose in terms of the things we needed to be considering in regards to how this would actually land and what that would look like. So I'm going to talk you through that in a moment. But before I do that, I just kind of wanted to talk a bit about recall. And I think, in the role of L&D, what we want to be happening is that people, go on our programs or they attend our college of courses or whatever that might look like for whoever's on the call here, and they actually recall the information we've discussed and they apply it. And that's when, we have been successful in our role. So I always like to think of recall in regards to how I design the content that I run. And this, some research done by IBM a number of years ago, and it's been repeated numerous times over. And it was some research done in regards to a group of people that were divided randomly into 3 subgroups, and they were all taught something very simple, using 3 different methods. So one group were told, they were taught that way. One group were told and shown, and one group were told, shown, and experienced the learning itself. And I think the results here actually speak for themselves, and again reflect, I suppose, the adult learning theory that people learn best through experience. So the group that were told something in terms of their recall, 3 months later, they could only remember 10%. The group that were told and shown something, you know, the stats are a little bit higher, but they're still not that amazing. After 3 months, they could remember 32%. But the group that were actually told, shown, and actually experienced, actually applied the learning itself, they actually retained 65% of what they had learned 3 months later. So, you know, I think really, you know, important stats, and really important for, you know, us to think about in regards to how we actually design learning, particularly now in our new virtual environment. You might be wondering why I have that nice image there of the parachute, and no, it's not me planning my next holiday or anything like that, but it's taken from a book I read recently by John Whitmore called It's All About Coaching for Performance. And in it, he talks about showing these results of the importance of recall to a group of parachute jumper trainers. And they became very concerned when they realized that they were the way that they were teaching emergency procedures was all by telling. So they were only telling them what to do rather than telling, showing, and experiencing. So they were very quick to improve their system in regards to that. But why am I talking about this? And you know, how did this actually apply to the virtual landscape? So what I want to do now is actually talk about how we within LogMeIn and within the team that I work in, how we actually approach development in this era of remote working, and looking at that in relation to pre, during, and actually post learning in order for us to be able to drive engagement in our learning. So again, you know, I think what's important here, it's not just about the one-stop shop of, you know, during the learning itself. It's about what happens before, and it's also about what happens afterwards as well. So in regards to the kind of setup of what's going to be experienced, in kind of preparing people for that particular you know, training session they're looking to attend, we look to engage the learners in advance with pre-reading and also video links, just kind of not too much, because I think if someone looks at a training course and sees that there is a multitude of things to address or look at in advance, they might not actually show up for the training itself. So what's really important is to, you know, just give them a little bit, even like I suppose it's kind of a taster and an idea of what they're going to be learning as part of that. So we look to create some nice, really short, like bite-sized articles or videos that will entice them and get them excited about the training that they're going to be attending. We are, I'm not so sure how much you know about our company, but we're a very large global organization, almost 4,000 employees across multiple locations across the world. We have systems, obviously, that support us in terms of scheduling our training. We have our own learning management system, our own LMS. But I always think with that as well, it's really important, I think, to have the personal touch as well in terms of training. And what I always like to do is, in advance of any workshop that I'm running, is to send my own email to the attendees, let them know I'm excited about them coming along, we're going to be learning and discussing and talking about. So now it's not just an automated message. They know there's the person they're going to be meeting when they do enter into the virtual classroom. And also as well, you know, coming prepared, I think, as well. And again, going back to the different styles of learning and thinking about extroversion and introversion and those that are more reflective and thoughtful, and asking them to think about maybe a question in advance, something that they want to put into the room, something that they want to, you know, maybe they've got something they're struggling with, they want to talk to their peers about. So getting them to be actually prepared in advance with some ideas themselves that they want to talk about or that they want to discuss before attending the learning itself. So that's some of the ideas, I suppose, to get them prepared for coming into the virtual classroom and what that's actually going to look like. So what does it actually look like then? And what are some of the ideas that I want to share with you today in regards to how we look to increase engagement as part of our workshops? Number one rule, which is so important to me in regards to training, is camera on. You know, in terms of, you know, I no longer get to see everyone's lovely faces in the classroom, but it's really important that I can see people in the virtual classroom. So I always encourage cameras on. And of course, I'm conscious as well of things that might be going on in the background. So of course, if you can't have it on for the entire duration, that is fine. But I would encourage for anyone that's putting a point into the room or is asking a question, to put their camera on for that. You know, communication is what you say, but it's also how you say it. So you can tell so much about someone's engagement by their tone of voice, their body language, whether you're telling someone that you hate them or you love them or you couldn't care less about them. Your body language gives away so much. So for anyone running programs or delivering learning, I would be encouraging, you know, whatever platform you're using, put those cameras on. I also kind of, as my setup for the ground rules, I also talk about the fact that I don't want my voice to be the only voice that they hear. So I do want to encourage as much participation as possible. And I think sometimes it can be sometimes a bit daunting to have to, because you're conscious of all the other voices that are going to be coming in as well, to put your voice into the virtual classroom. So a way for me to do that is to do a very, very quick intro, getting everyone in the room just to get their voices in the virtual classroom by actually just introducing themselves, their role, where they are, etc. And oftentimes I ask them as well if there's any remote management tip or any remote learning tip that they could share with the room, to also include that as well. So just something that I think is a good way of creating engagement in the beginning. In terms of the ground rules as well, and in terms of that adapting to our current environment, I always communicate that everyone is welcome. So I've had toddlers, babies, you know, 5-year-olds, pets, all sorts of different family circumstances joining my learning sessions. And I think it's important to set that up at the beginning, because the last thing I want is for someone to say, oh, my baby is sleeping, so rather than, in my arms, so rather than attending that workshop, I'll just leave it because I don't want to disturb anyone or have this going on. I always say, please attend. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, perfection is the enemy of progress. I think right now we're in a world where nothing is perfect right now, and our best is really enough. So whatever way or shape or form you can come to a training session, I set the ground rules in advance to say you're more than welcome, whatever way that might look, to definitely do that. Similar to what you would have experienced earlier, to what Paul did, and Joe's going to run one of these very shortly as well. Utilizing polls to understand and engage. I think it's a great way to understand, what people are looking for in terms of the training. And I think people just like, using those tools and seeing what others are thinking and saying as well. So, I think kind of shifting and adapting, and not just having me speaking for a long period of time and that's it as the only way of learning. I think it's the ways of adapting and looking to bring in different perspectives is really important. Breakout groups. So another great way of learning as well is utilizing breakout groups. That's something that we have within one of our products, GoTo Training, which I'm using on a regular basis. So it's a great way of actually being able to put people into different groups so they can have different conversations, being able to choose sizes, whether they're a large group, whether it's one-on-ones. Again, it's also weaving in that 20% of learning through others that I talked about earlier. It's also great for those that have more of a preference for, maybe more reflective and thoughtful and don't want to speak out in a large group, but they're better more one-on-one. So again, looking to those different ways of adapting style to support those learning styles. And I think for me, one of my biggest concerns in regards to not being in the face-to-face classroom any longer was worrying about losing that peer learning. Because as I often say in my training programs, I will do a lot of talking. But it's the learning that you get from your peers, from hearing what their examples, that they've had a similar experience to you and being able to share that and hear from them. So that was one of the things that I was concerned about, but I found the breakout groups have been such an amazing way to actually continue on those conversations. So I would, for anyone that isn't using, functionalities like that, I think they're a great way to bring those groups together and to continue those conversations. So a great way to make that possible and to stimulate that conversation and engagement. And again, kind of going back to different methods and different ways of using different tools in online learning, whether it be polls or whether it be breakout rooms, it's really important to adapt and shift and not just have a me talking at slides for 2 hours, because that's going to be very, very draining and very boring for anyone. And as adults, we have the ability to reset our attention span, and that tends to drop significantly after 20 minutes. So I'm hoping you're all still with me now at this stage. I've probably been talking for about 20 minutes. But people are more likely to be distracted when they feel like they're not playing an active role in learning. So it makes sense to give them incentives to learn and to make them feel as involved as possible. So I love utilizing tools like Kahoot as a fun kind of learning game at the end of a learning session. So for anyone that's not familiar with Kahoot, it's a great way of like creating a little fun quiz, and people can do it from on their phones in any location that they are in. So it's a real kind of nice way of applying gamification to a learning session. And there's some great tools out there as well. I know Mentimeter is another great tool as well you can utilize, and you can actually embed that in your slide deck as well. So again, it's how can I, keep people's attention? How can I keep them engaged? And the way of doing that is to shift and adapt and use your voice and use your own body language as well to do that, but also building on using polls and breakout groups and different games as well to keep people interested. And going back to my, my recall slide was on the previous slide from this, and my parachute example, for us as well, it's so important wherever possible that attendees can actually practice and apply the tools that we are discussing. So for example, if I'm talking about a model for coaching or a model for delivering feedback, I will look to breakout groups to get them to actually apply utilizing that model with their peers, and then we all come back together as a regroup and discuss how that went. So again, looking to utilize as much as we can in terms of the different ways of engagement, but also how can they actually, I'm gonna tell them about it, I'm gonna show them how to use it, but I'm also going to ask them to use it themselves as well, and not just when they leave the classroom, because I want them to actually practice it before they leave me. And then post then, because how do we kind of reinforce the learning? How do we keep things real for people, or keep things constant for them? And one way I find is accountability, and that can be done by either completing an action plan, which I encourage them to do as part of the session. But other ways, and again, it goes back to my love of peer learning and having someone to kind of bounce off as well, is assigning peer buddies and peer coaches as well. So what I look to do is, if someone is paired up with someone else to apply a model, we'll say like a coaching model or a feedback model, I look for them to actually buddy up and maybe catch up for a virtual coffee in a week or 2 weeks time to discuss how they've actually applied the learning, or if they haven't, why haven't they, or what's gotten in their way. And oftentimes it's when you have that accountability partner that you feel like, you know what, I said I would do that to them, or I would do that and I didn't do it, and it's a great way of kind of reinforcing and reminding them of the learning as well. So I think that's always a great thing, accountability for myself and my own development. Again, learning by doing. So they have their action plan and looking to apply things as soon as possible. Again, we look to align a lot of our training as well to what's happening in the calendar year. So for example, right now we're coming up to mid-year reviews. So I'm running lots of workshops right now on delivering feedback, managing performance, coaching, setting smart goals, etc. So again, looking to make it as applicable as possible to what's currently being experienced by our employees. And also, post-work follow-up in terms of articles, videos, which we can, follow up and send to our attendees as well via our learning management system as well, to help increase the engagement in our learning and applying that. And again, what I'm finding as well is that, people are really enjoying coming into the virtual classroom because they're getting to see their colleagues they might not have seen in a while because they aren't working on the same project or they haven't visited that office location. So I think it's also a nice way of bringing people together as well. So that's been great as well in terms of the engagement. So I suppose in terms of where we are, we've still got a long way to go. We've still got a lot to learn and a lot of adapting to do as well. But I think we've had time to process things. We've taken that pause to assess what needs to be done, and we've looked to, I suppose, apply as best we possibly can. So, these things have really helped us in regards to how we deliver learning, and I'm hoping some of the things that I've discussed will also help you in regards to the areas that you're working in as well. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Joe, who's going to take you through some further insights in regards to learning in this new normal.
Yeah, thanks for that, Aisling. Let me just, while I'm pulling up my slides here, really interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. Good to hear some stories from people in the front line. and it's great to get your feedback. You're there, you're at the forefront of our training methods in our company. And obviously we've got 4,000 employees right now working from 4,000 different locations. Okay, so a real challenge for you and your team, and you've been doing a great job. And just to cover a couple of things, I think your original poll, you know, what people kind of were concerned about with online learning and giving online courses. I think for me, having to make the switch from physical events to virtual events, one of the big differences is feedback from the audience and engagement. You know, you've no real understanding if your points are resonating, if people are listening. You know, if you crack a joke, you're met with a wall of silence, and that can be a little bit unnerving. So I think certainly for me, you're switching to a virtual world. The lack of feedback is something that I think is a big differentiator from the physical events. You also talked a bit about the newish approach, right? And I think that's an important thing for people to understand as well, right? Is that this is not a completely new world. There's many industries, many organizations that have been more advanced when it comes to online learning, more advanced when it comes to virtual tools. And what we've seen over the last 3 months is more of a mass adoption than the emergence of anything new. And it's really important that people are aware of that, because there are a number of areas in terms of best practice. There are a number of areas that people have been doing this for a long time, and there's plenty of lessons already learned. So if people do find themselves moving into this territory for the first time, it's something that, you know, there is plenty of areas where they can go and get advice and get a steer from that. It's not the first time that people are kind of entering the space. You also talked a bit about learning styles and the different ways that you can bring learning styles in across in a virtual manner. I think definitely for me, I'm certainly the old school way of classroom teaching with a textbook to go and read and go back and do that. That wasn't the most optimal way for myself to study. I think as soon as I got into college, I embraced new ways around project group learnings, around kind of field trips, more kind of practical conversations, doing things like case studies, and even I think over the years I was in college, you know, technology was always improving. I think when I started college, broadband wasn't available to the masses, right? That's going back a few years now. It is now. YouTube, I think, had emerged between my undergrad and my postgrad, and instead of reading about great academics and what they had done in terms of the theory for marketing, we're able to watch YouTube presentations, so we could actually see them in action, giving talks and giving presentations. And technology's always had a kind of a growing impact on learning. And it's just great to see now so many people moving to a non-learning space, because, you know, there can be skeptics out there, but I think the advantages of it are quite evident to everybody. But before we get into that, the tools obviously is a big thing. People understanding what tools to use, you know, the right tools for them. It's not always an easy thing. And with that, I'd just like to bring Paul back for a poll, because we would like to just ask people, you know, what type of tools they have been using in the last 3 months for online learning. So have they been using general video conferencing tools, general webinar tools, or have they been using specific online training? So for example, what we have today is GoToWebinar. It's very much about kind of one-way communication with attendees in listen mode only. Video conferencing is good for more smaller groups, collaboration. Everybody gets a chance to talk and share the webcams, but that might be not what you're looking for in certain circumstances as well. But then doing things like tests, both pre, mid, and post sessions, have you got the capabilities of doing that? And that's where we're talking about specific online training software. So great to know what kind of tools people have been using. Has it been video conferencing tools? Has it been webinar tools, specific online training tools, or perhaps all of the above? So I think Paul should have that up now, and he might be able to give us some results.
So Joseph, it's open, so we'll just give it a few more seconds for everyone to answer, and then we'll close it.
Okay. And then when you're closing that, Paul, I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen that people can see. One moment. Let me just go into this, sharing, perfect. Okay.
Amazing.
So excellent.
We've got the results come in, so I'll read them out to you. So we've had 48% say general video conferencing tools, 6% say webinar tools, 6% say specific online training software, and 39% say all of the above.
Okay. Okay, great. So a bit of a kind of a split across each of them, which is good. And we'll touch on that towards the end. You know, what kind of tools are appropriate for the different types of scenarios, because you know, different tools come with different capabilities. At GoTo, we have a suite of all of them. But I was conscious I didn't want to make this very much a product orientated section, because I know I enjoy speaking on education webinars because it's always a great topic. Learning and development is something that has such a positive outcome. It's nice to be a bit more softer in our approach when we talk about our products, rather than giving people the hard sell. And to do that, to kind of tee it up, I've been spending a bit of time doing some research for today, and I stumbled across an article on the World Economic Forum that talked about the impact of this pandemic on learners. And there was one specific stat that really stood out for me, was that just under 1.5 billion people, learners, have been displaced by this pandemic. That's right across pre-primary schools, primary schools, lower secondary, upper secondary, tertiary level colleges, universities, but an overwhelming amount of people that have had such an important part of their lives and their development disrupted by this pandemic. And I think, with my experience of it, from anecdotal feedback from organizations we talk to, and from people I know that are learning at the moment, there's been a real varied level of response to this. Some organizations certainly more equipped than others to deliver education over this crisis. I've seen my own kids that are in school and primary school pretty much come to a standstill. That there is a little bit of engagement with the teachers where they send out a list of tasks for homeschooling, but in terms of engagement with the education institution, it's pretty kind of minimal. But I have seen with my niece, who is in secondary level school, where she left her school on the Thursday in Ireland. It was March 12th, I think, when we closed everything down. And on Friday morning, 9 a.m., March 13th, her schooling continued just as normal, except through virtual platforms. And she has completed her year. They just finished for summer holidays 2 weeks ago. No disrupt or breakage in their education. So the examples are there of how to deliver effective training in the world that we find ourselves at the moment, and there's organizations that aren't prepared. And so, Aisling, you're at the front line. You'd be more kind of tapped into the practitioners than I would. How have you felt people have been prepared for this?
Yeah, and I think we have been at an advantage, I suppose, because of the products that we have, and because we are so global. I mean, I couldn't be on a plane all the time. So we had, I suppose, an advantage to an extent that we already had been delivering some of our content virtually. But I think it's varied as well. I mean, you have the likes of the big companies that, would have already been delivering this, this content virtually. But I think as well, it's that adaptation, again, back to my point around the content as well. You can, there's some companies that have stuff ready to go, but is it the right content either? So I think there's a mix there as well in terms of the mediums they're using, but also delivering the right content, because there's stuff that could have been relevant 6 months ago that is no longer relevant any longer. So I think there's a mix there as well in terms of the right content that's being delivered and also the mediums that are being used. But again, I think, I have some colleagues or some of my friends that are in companies that, we could never work from home, and suddenly within 2 days they were at home running so efficiently. So I think they're probably a bit behind in terms of where we were at, but I think people are catching up and realizing that how much we can actually do from home now and virtually as well. So I think people are at different stages, but I think all realizing now that this is the way forward to an extent. A hybrid version though, because that caveat that I do want to get back into the classroom, the physical classroom at some stage.
Yeah, I think it's a really valuable point, Aisling, when you talk about the organizations that said they could never move to remote working and then did overnight, right? I think there's definitely skeptics out there when we talk about online learning. When we look at what the future might be for the industry, there's people that identify challenges like a lack of training for the trainers. Okay, so there is a difference delivering online versus delivering in person. We've talked about the kind of concerns you highlighted at the start, how I felt about the lack of feedback. How do you deal with that? How do you know that you're resonating with the audience? Insufficient bandwidth is one, right? So has everybody got the technical capability in terms of being able to have devices at the ready, been able to log online and get the quality of service that they need? And then overall as well, because we've rushed into this, and it's been pretty much forced on people, how prepared are we? And has there been little preparation across certain organizations that they're not equipped to run it? And those examples have been cited of ways that would think that maybe this way of learning, this way of training is not sustainable and will cause kind of sustained problems as we go forward. But I think in general for me, and I touched on this already, there's great examples of online training and education already well before this pandemic ever emerged. I know I was involved in building an EdTech product back in 2008 in Ireland, where some of the best teachers in Ireland at secondary level in school had recorded tutorials and uploaded them onto a website where students could come in and watch those tutorials and download their notes and revisit content that maybe they were struggling with a bit in school. And I thought it was a great way of providing supplementary learning to the physical in-class experience. I myself have studied through a number of different ways. I'm back studying at the moment as well, and it's purely remote. It's online, not even that dynamic. It's just using online books and doing tests through computers. And what I love about that, the flexibility. I learn at my own pace. I take tests when I'm ready to take a test, and that's really fantastic. But I think overall for the future, and I think I agree with you, Aisling, I think it's a hybrid approach to learning. I think being able to have both physical options for in-class learning and remote options to complement that, and for people maybe to come back and revisit a physical event that was recorded and posted online to allow people to recover, to go back and review certain topics that maybe they didn't pick up at the time, or I was certainly susceptible to a bit of daydreaming in the classroom, and you might have missed a key area and you wanted to go back and revisit that. And I think to be able to have that at your fingertips, almost immediately after you walk out of a class is a real advantage to any learning program. But you talked a bit about the challenges, okay? And this is something that I suppose if we look at on a global level, okay, the challenges of learning online is, we talked about technology and reliable internet access. We talked about the availability of technology for people to actually be able to come online and learn, right? And there's a big gap across countries. If you look at EMEA, certain countries are surveyed where 95% of people said, yeah, we have access to internet and computers. We can study online. But if you compare it maybe to Indonesia, only 35% of people were available. So you kind of develop almost a two-speed approach to learning, and that can hold some people back. In the US, there was a survey done where I think nearly all 15-year-olds from privileged backgrounds had 100% access to computers and internet, where people from underprivileged backgrounds, 15-year-olds, 25% of them had no access. Some governments are intervening, like New South Wales and Australia are trying to help and intervene with providing technology and providing access to people. But for many, they think this pandemic might widen that digital divide. And in your experience, in terms of those challenges, how many times have you found some of your trainees, Aisling, struggling with internet connection and bandwidth, that they've had to turn off webcams, or maybe just not having availability of technology? It's probably not that common in terms of our organization, but for your peers and people that you've worked with, have you experienced any of those challenges firsthand?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it comes to a stage as well where particularly for those that are trying to homeschool as well, and you've got people that you've got kids trying to use the internet, and you're trying to get on it, and everyone's trying to work from home. And I think it's almost like having a schedule of who can do what, who can do what when. But I think that is, and whether it's, our broadband providers need to kind of speed up with what's going on. Even this morning, I had some technical issues myself. I was thankfully that all got sorted, but I think it is something that we're still learning to deal with and live with. And I think that will just kind of need to evolve with time as well. But I think it is a challenge, and I think it is difficult as well, particularly I'd say in the educational area as well, with kids, whether in primary or secondary or college or wherever location you're dialing in from. But the case that like some people might have better access to it over others, and what does that mean for them, and are they at a disadvantage? So I think that's something we haven't solved for yet. I think thankfully in terms of the way we've been working within our company, the majority of people have access and are able to utilize it. But I think it varies across my colleagues or friends that I would have working in a similar industry as well, that not everyone is able to have that available to them. And also I think to your point earlier, Joe, as well, around the challenges of it's not just a case that, okay, now I was in the classroom running training, now I'll just take all that classroom learning and I'll just conduct it virtually, and it'll just roll and it'll be fine. It's such an importance there to actually tailor it, and that's why we took the time to actually relook at our content and look at how it would apply. So definitely, I think there's some challenges there. But how long we've been in quarantine? I suppose 3 months. Look how far we've come with that as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now over the next 3 months.
Yeah, I think you raised some very valid points. We touched on a bit earlier on around the presenting the content that is suitable to the medium that it's been presented over, right? And I think that's one thing that is important to note. Online training is not about replicating the classroom environment and just delivering it virtually. There are different ways you can deliver that content to help people get a bit more engaged, right? And actually, one thing I was only thinking about this just off the top of my head, kind of over the last couple of days while we're preparing for this, and I was thinking about different ways I might have incorporated the technology that exists today in my learning over the years. And the first thing, I don't know, I was a pretty good geography student in school, and I enjoyed geography. But I always thought that what a tool Google Earth is today to supplement geography teaching, right? Because you can hone in on any feature, any coastal feature, any you know, glacial feature, anything from a geographical pinpoint. You can go to Google Earth, go in on any one of those kind of areas, like whether it's a beach, whether it's a V-shaped valley, whether it's something like, I've been watching a lot of free solo stuff on Netflix and Disney Plus the last couple of weeks, and you know, looking at Yosemite Park and all that kind of stuff you have there. Like, you can literally focus in on that from the comfort of your own home and see it firsthand, right? And I think that's a great way to supplement geography studies and to get a real visual of what the textbooks are talking about. So I think there's huge ways, you know, all these different kind of technologies can influence online learning and can complement the learning experience. And we talked about this not being new, okay? It might be the first time many people have experienced online learning, but online learning is not something new for the last 3 months. It's something that's been around for a while. And if we look at the research in the States around how effective online learning has been, you know, there is research that shows that the retention of information with online learning can be anything from 25 to 60%, right? Where traditional classroom is maybe 8 to 10%. And that comes down to a couple of things, and I've alluded to it already. Apparently, actually, you can learn faster online. You can learn in 40 to 60% of the time it takes to learn in a physical classroom. And a lot of that is the ability to watch back on recordings and revisit some content if you've missed it. The ability to skip ahead. So if you feel comfortable with a specific topic and the teacher is going through that again, that you go, I have this covered, I don't need to revise this section, and you skip ahead to another section, you know. And then also using, you know, get forums for Q&A and engagement with people that you can just have, you know, almost access to 24/7, where you can ping people in the similar space you are from a learning perspective and ask questions and get feedback. And I think that's really kind of useful. So, but the most important thing on all that is the tools, right? And the tools need to be ready and available to everybody so they can learn. And to kind of do that and to lead into the segue on our tools, I just wanted to take through 3 different tools that we have in LogMeIn. Okay, we've GoToWebinar, we've GoToMeeting, and we've GoToTraining. And Aisling, I'm sure you've experienced using all these 3 tools for the different training sessions that you've done. So feel free to chime in at any stage with additional points and advice. But I wanted to give people, you know, a bit of an understanding of the different types of scenarios where you would use different tools. Okay, so if I look at the first thing in terms of how many people are attending your session, right? For webinar tools like GoToWebinar, which everybody's getting, you know, a first-hand demonstration of today, GoToWebinar can handle up to 3,000 attendees. So really, when you're looking at large-scale delivery of content, and I think to friends of mine that maybe studied things like arts in college that regularly had 500 people in the lecture hall, you know, GoToWebinar is a tool to address that kind of an audience with the kind of content you deliver in that environment is probably the right tool to use. Okay, the likes of GoToMeeting and GoToTraining can hold up to 250 and 200 attendees respectively. I still think that they're quite big limits for those tools. Even if you're bordering that 100 to 200 mark, I would still maybe kind of veer people towards GoToWebinar and those types of deliveries, because I think they're a bit more appropriate to those types of audiences. But you know, one big thing is how many people are attending your session, and that is a big indication of what tool you should be using when you go deliver the content. Then it's about the level of engagement, okay, that you're looking for the attendees. What you'll find today with GoToWebinar is everybody, the audience is in listen-only mode, okay? You don't have the ability to turn on your mic and ask questions. You don't have the ability to turn on your webcam and show your beautiful face and background to all the audience, okay? As organizers, we could pull people up at select times if required, but normally for this type of content, a lot of people are in listen-only mode. And again, going back to that example of 500 people in a lecture hall, right? A lot of them there just to receive information. You're not going to take questions from every one of those 500 people. You don't want every one of those 500 people to be able to contribute at any stage, you know, just by themselves. You want to keep a bit of control. It's a large audience. You need to keep control of the content and the delivery. Again, webinar as a tool for that is probably the most appropriate one. When you get to GoToMeeting, this you can have, you know, most people showing webcams. Everybody has the opportunity to turn on the mics and provide questions and contribute to the session. Everybody can share their screens. So this is for much more kind of collaborative groups. And I'm thinking maybe, you know, project groups within a college or breakout sessions from a bigger session where people want to collaborate on a project and come back. Maybe they've got 20 minutes, 30 minutes to do some role plays to prepare for a presentation. You know, GoToMeeting is a tool for that, is right up that street. And then for GoToTraining, it's a bit more of a combination of both. Okay, you have the ability for that listen-only mode. You also have the ability for breakout rooms and a bit more collaboration. Okay, so again, depending on that level of engagement and that interaction you want with the trainees, you know, that will determine the different types of tools that you should be using. Again, in terms of webcams, okay, so today on GoToWebinar, you know, we could have 6 of us up here on stage, like you would maybe in a larger event. You might have kind of panelists, you know, doing kind of Q&A session. But you're kind of limited to 6 again, because you wouldn't overcrowd that stage with too many people. Nor you want to keep it pretty focused. You want to be pretty clear on the communication that you're giving, and therefore we reduce the ability to showcase so many webcams on that. Different with GoToMeeting, okay, you can share up to 25 webcams at any one time. And really why we land on 25, it's kind of best practice, you know, unless you're using a pretty big screen, you put more than 25 cameras on a screen and you can't see too many people on it, right? So from a best practice perspective, we would be saying 25 webcams is the most you should really be having on any one screen. And then you go to the training perspective. From GoToTraining, you use, again, 6 simultaneous webcams, a bit like GoToWebinar. But with GoToTraining as well, you also get GoToMeeting functionality. So if you needed to go into those extra sessions with more webcams and more collaboration, you could do that too as part of the GoToTraining product. Then this is another thing in terms of, you know, registrations and attendance and knowing who's been there and who's not been there. Webinar tools like GoToWebinar come with a really good registration process. So if you're doing guest lectures, if you're doing, you know, special kind of events, or you're trying to do a roll call and you want to know who's there, you know, you can get people to register for the class, okay? And then what you can also do as well is once they've registered and you have their details, you can do automated emails that reminds them of the lecture coming up, and they'll say, look, you know, they'll get notifications on timelines you want to determine, but let's say a week out, don't forget this lecture is happening next week. You know, the day before, don't forget this lecture is happening tomorrow, and even an hour before, don't forget we're going to be live in 60 minutes with your lecture on whatever topic it is that you're doing or whatever training course that you're doing. You know, that ability to use that registration process to do a lot of proactive communications before the session. And Aisling talked about, you know, being proactive, sending out pre-course content. You could use those emails to do that and get people prepped before they come into the session. From a GoToMeeting perspective, you don't have that level of registration. Okay, what you do have is probably greater ease with which you can arrange these sessions through calendar integrations like Outlook or G Suite. And where I would see GoToMeeting being used a bit more is maybe, you know, setting up kind of practicals or tutorials with smaller groups of people. You know, maybe one-to-one sessions where you're mentoring someone from a thesis perspective if you're in the, you know, a university or a college. Those kind of areas where you're setting up multiple meetings quite regularly and you're providing people with your details quite regularly. You know, GoToMeeting is a tool that would help more with that. And the same with GoToTraining, like GoToWebinar, those registration capabilities are a bit more advanced and a bit more useful for those larger audiences when you need to make sure you understand who's coming in and who's turned up, and more importantly, who hasn't turned up, okay? And what it also allows you to do with those registration details for the people that didn't turn up, okay, you can record the event and they can all receive the recording of the session afterwards to allow them follow up on the content, okay? So because they haven't been there on a day, they still have an opportunity to recap all the content that was discussed and stay on top of the coursework that they need to do. Again, just a couple of last points. I know we're running close to time. We might have some Q&As. Just the more registration details you have, the more analytics you can do. And again, GoToWebinar and GoToTraining would be stronger in that. You wouldn't have a huge amount of analytics in terms of registrations and departure times and all that kind of stuff from a GoToMeeting perspective. But also in GoToTraining, you get the ability to put a lot of for a content library for the course that you're doing, course catalogs, you know, so a bit more capability there to have content and share it out with the different trainees that you have on the course. Again, a number of other things in terms of, we talked about the automated emails, we talked about calendaring. Breakout rooms is again another function that you might want to use quite regularly. You know, that's something that's more deliverable through GoToTraining than our other products. Where we see that being used a lot is literally like those use cases we discussed earlier on, is having a group together to deliver main kind of content and then breaking up into small groups to do, you know, project-based work or to continue discussion together themselves and come back with some useful points back into the main group towards the end. And then engagement is a huge part of it. Okay, you've seen with GoToWebinar today, we've done polls, there can be surveys at the end. We can also have people raise hands and ask questions through the chat function. And what we would have done beforehand with Paul, you can do practice sessions as well. Okay, so you can make sure you can rehearse it, you can get everything ready, and you know that everything should move rather seamlessly during the event. Big thing with GoToMeeting is maybe you want to bring people into it at short notice, so you can do things like call out. You can provide more dialing capabilities in terms of people use their telephones to do that. So a bit more ease at which people can join meetings, because it's a bit more personal, it's a bit more collaborative, and you're going to know all the people that are on the call and have more details ready to hand as well. Then for GoTo Training, though, you might want to hit people with a test before that session starts, or maybe a surprise test mid-session. But also you can have those tests post-session as well to capture that kind of that level of engagement people have had. You know, have they learned the content? Have they done, you know, maybe it's they need to pass a certain level to move to the next stage of training. That can all be built into the GoTo Training platforms as well. So important that you have a really good understanding of your goals and your objectives and what you're trying to achieve from your training before you decide which tools are the right tools to use. So guys, that concludes our session for this afternoon. I really appreciate the time you've afforded both Aisling and I to talk you through our views and our opinions on the online training world as we know it today over the last 3 months and where it might end up in the future. I think Paul's going to come back on. We're going to take some questions if anybody has them, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on some of our own webinars.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joseph and Aisling. That was great. So we have got time for some questions, so I'll go straight into it so we don't run out of time. So the first question is for the both of you. So I don't know who wants to go first, you can decide. But the question is, can you discuss trends in GoTo's metrics and the best ways for clients to use these to measure success and pivot their teaching models depending on engagement statistics? So
Aisling, you may have real life examples of using that, so I'll let you go first. If not, yeah, you can defer to me.
So I suppose in terms of metrics, you know, what's great is, as we were talking earlier about being able to view obviously who's attended, and also a really great thing as well that we can use within functionality is attention as well. So how much are you actually viewing the screen? And if you dive off, if it goes down to 45%, you know, you can be like, okay, engagement is dropping here. How can I bring that back up? So as a facilitator, I find that a really useful metric to be able to ensure that people are actually engaged and to be able to call upon people. I even call that at the beginning as well. Listen, you know, I can see if people aren't engaged, maybe they're hopping onto email or something else. So that can be a great way to help you bring them back in again. You might have something further to add to that, Joe, as well.
Yeah, I think just I was going to call out the engagement tracking. Actually, I think that's really important. You can pinpoint maybe areas of your content that you might be losing people, or that times throughout the session that you might be losing people. So I think, you know, I think what we've seen in some best practice at 40 to 45 minutes is normally optimum. You go over that, and you start losing people a little bit. Also for post session, right? So if you do put out a recording, okay, and you're looking for maybe some people that didn't make the actual session itself, and you want to make sure they've done the follow up. Not only can you tell if they've watched a recording or not, you can actually tell how much of that recording they've watched. Okay, so did they just turn it on and after 5 minutes drop off, right? Or did they actually play out the full recording? Okay, and that kind of level of engagement and that level of analysis post event is really important for people to get a really good understanding of how engaged their trainees were and at what stage maybe they lost them, and then how many people did actually follow up and rewatch the recordings.
And that helps to go back to your content then and maybe relook at things if you are losing them halfway through.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent, thank you. So that pretty much leads into our next question, which will be good. So the question is, in terms of virtual learning, how do you choose a time that is most democratic to ensure most people can attend, and how can you engage people who can't attend live?
Yeah, great question. And I think, you know, it's hard because so I would be primarily looking to run training for our EMEA location. So I'm also very lucky. I've got a colleague in Boston and a colleague in Utah as well. So we're running programs at different times over the course of the day, and it's different as well. Like what I'm finding is, so my colleague in Boston, the courses he's running are probably around 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Ireland and UK time. And I'm finding actually a lot of parents are actually dialing on. The kids maybe are, you know, entertained somewhere else, and they're actually dialing on then to actually attend training. So what we're almost kind of doing is not having a 24-hour training session, but we are looking to run programs to try and utilize our time zones. Now, for anyone that doesn't have the luxury of having colleagues in Utah and Boston, what I would be encouraging is I find the morning, as early as possible in the morning is a great time. to actually run the training, depending on obviously situations as well. But I find later on in the evening or in the afternoon, or when the homeschooling kicks in, that can be a lot more difficult. But I find through trial and error for my population that the morning is a pretty good time to get people. But again, I'm not keeping them for 4 or 5 hours. It's short, it's concise, it's either 45, an hour, or an hour and a half in terms of content. And then to the other point there as well, in terms of those that can't attend, so it is about recording sessions, but also about that self-paced learning I was talking about as well, so they can kind of view it in their own time. And again, we're looking at different ways we can, support the learning as well. So dipping our toe into the world of podcasts, looking at that flipped classroom as well. So we're still learning as well, but also getting feedback, like hearing from the people that we're delivering the training to. What do you want more of? What do you want less of as well? So again, we're not fully there yet, but looking to learn from the feedback as well.
Yeah, I think, Paul, to expand on that, I think, one thing that's great about doing everything online, right, is how accessible people are. So you can always do a survey and do a poll and ask people, for times that suit them. The second thing, though, as well, is, and particularly to some of our products, so you can record, right? So if someone isn't there, they can actually come back and watch it at another stage. But you can also simulate a live session. Okay, so let's say, for example, you've recorded today's session. You could play this at a later time. You could still invite everybody in. You could address them at the start and say, thanks for coming today. You could introduce it, and it feels like we're doing it all live. Okay, people can submit questions, and in the background, people can go back to them with answers to the questions. Okay, so you can do that as well, and that's another useful tool for people that are using, that are moving to online learning. There's more than one way than that specific hour, that time, that doesn't have to necessarily be set in stone for everybody. And just a funny one on the times, because I was only thinking about this myself again when I was kind of doing a bit of prep for this. When I went back to college a number of years back, I went back nighttime, and I was doing classes on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And I think it was like 7 till 10 that we're doing the classes. And some days you're going, I would just love not to go into the college to do this, but you went in and you did it anyway. The option to do it online would be great. But also, I remember kind of thinking as well, because then it took me the hours of 10 till 11 to go home after that, right? That I was kind of thinking about that, going, I would be actually, I've got small children, they go down to bed at, at 7:30, 8 o'clock. For me, maybe 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. or 9 to 11 might be a bad time to sit down and do some online kind of training as well. So I think you'll find it's very different for different demographics and people in different stages of their lives. But the great thing about online is that it gives you that flexibility, and you can get that engagement and feedback from the attendees as well on when they would like to host those sessions most.
Excellent, fantastic. I think we've got time for just one quick question. So you touched on around that you can obviously post the session after it's been live. So have you got any sort of other ways which we can share the recording apart from listening it on YouTube? And what sort of channels can we have those recordings posted? So I don't know if you want to answer that one, Joseph.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be on YouTube. Okay, you can embed it in your own website. So for example, if you're a university, if you're a training organization, you can just bring people to your website and they can consume the recording from there. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be on YouTube. You distribute it predominantly through links, okay, through emails and like that. It can be watched on mobile devices, on laptop devices, desktop devices. I'm trying to think, is there any other creative way of delivering that content back? I would need to check if you could just capture the audio and potentially put it back as a podcast. That might be another way of doing it. Trying to think, is there any way we could suppress the video? I'll take that away and come back, Paul, with an answer if there's another way of doing it from a podcast. But that would be another kind of way of consuming content that's growing in popularity by the day. Podcasts are something that have really taken off over the last couple of years, and it would be great if you could take the recording and put that into a podcast.
Fantastic. So unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. But just for the audience, we have got another session taking place tomorrow morning, which will be at 9:30 BST. That will be with Robert Lowe from McGraw-Hill and George Hooling from Coventry University, and they'll be presenting on set students up for course success in an online and hybrid world. So I'll put in the chat a link where you can obviously access the registration page to join that session. So obviously, if you'd like to join, you can just go through there. Lastly, but not leastly, I'd like to thank Aisling and Joseph for taking their time. Fantastic session. I've taken a lot of away from this, and I use GoToWebinar a lot, so a lot of things I can put into practice. If you've got any questions, feel free to go to our virtual exhibition where you can put forward some questions to the guys, and they'll be in touch. But lastly, thank you again, and we hope to see you all on another session tomorrow.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks very much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.